Hello everyone, my name is Ben, and this year we are going to close out the conference with a topic near and dear to my heart, the 1996 Roland Emmerich masterpiece, Independence Day. This movie came out 28 years ago, so this is your one and only spoiler warning. You have about 3.5 minutes to head out before I give away the ending. But actually, we should probably get this out of the way first. Independence Day was distributed by 20th Century Fox, which is now 20th Century Studios, Inc. The use of the screen grabs and the video clips in this presentation is protected under the American Fair Use and New Zealand Fair Dealing. If any Fox executives are watching this talk on YouTube, I just want to let you know we're all still very upset about Firefly. Right then. Meet David Levinson. He's a 40-something telecom technician working for a satellite television company in New York City. David doesn't smoke, he bikes to work, and he recycles. One day, a gigantic alien spacecraft arrives in Earth's orbit. Several dozen smaller city-sized ships break off from the mothership and descend to hover menacingly over major cities all over the world, like so. This gigantic mothership is also broadcasting a radio signal to the smaller craft using hijacked satellites to bounce the signal to ships on the other side of the planet. This is causing outages for David's satellite TV customers, so while everyone else in the office is glued to the television watching the news about the alien spacecraft parking themselves all over the globe, David is hyper-focused on troubleshooting outages. He soon figures out that he figures out the pattern in the signal so his company can filter it out from their broadcasts and restore service. But then he realizes that the signal contains a counter that's slowly reducing itself to nothing and will hit 0 in about 7 hours. David is a chess player, and he knows the setup for an attack when he sees one. This is a countdown to checkmate. So David's dad drives him to Washington, D.C., and he manages to convince his ex-wife, a high-ranking White House staffer, to get him a few minutes with President Whitmore with less than an hour to go before the countdown ends. Spoiler alert. The president orders evacuations of all major cities, but it is too late. Cities around the globe are devastated in moments. David, his ex, his dad, and the president barely manage to escape on Air Force One. Meanwhile, the counterattack is mounted, but human weaponry is useless against the energy shields the aliens employ on their city destroyers and their fighters. After the Secretary of Defense informs the president that one of the alien fighters had been captured in the 1940s after it crash-landed near Roswell, New Mexico, our heroes land at Area 51 to find out what's going on with the whole alien situation. Here they meet Dr. Oken, the director of the facility, who tells them that they've repaired the captured alien fighter. They've been studying it for the last half-century. The president is convinced to deploy a nuclear weapon against the alien city destroyer above Houston, Texas. The alien shields shrug off the atomic blast, and now East Texas is covered in nuclear fallout, which only mildly decreases the desirability of living there. I did have pause for laughter in there, and I'm glad you guys laughed, because that's actually funnier than me saying pause for laughter. The alien city destroyers move on to new targets, while David decides to get drunk, as all hope is lost. David's dad tries to comfort him, telling David to get off the concrete floor before he catches a cold. A light bulb goes off in David's mind as he realizes that while the aliens can't be hurt by conventional attacks, they may be vulnerable to a cyber attack. So now that he's sufficiently inebriated, David decides it's time to do some hacking. He works out a way to remotely trigger a command to toggle the shields of the captured Area 51 fighter. The next step is to weaponize it into a virus, deliver it to the mothership, forcing it to instruct all the city destroyers to lower their shields just long enough for humanity to fight back. Captain Steve Hiller pilots the captured Area 51 fighter, which still works, to the mothership with David riding shotgun. They deliver the virus and the nuclear warhead, managing to get clear before the mothership explodes. With the shields down and the mothership destroyed, the aliens are suddenly not so tough. Humanity fights back and is ultimately victorious. The end. This masterpiece of cinema is not without critics, though. Most viewers seem to understand the obvious nod to H.G. Wells' novel War of the Worlds, where the alien invaders are wiped out by Earth's bacteria and viruses because they have no natural immunity to infectious diseases. But the thought of a human-made computer virus taking down an alien computer system is just a little too silly for some people. This one actually has nothing to do with what I just said, but I have to include it for all the Lord of the Rings nerds in the audience. Some critics are so upset with the Independence Day hacking scene that they dedicate entire blog posts to complaining about the outlandishness. And for the most part, they all kind of boil down to the same gripe. How can one dorky guy with an Apple PowerBook 5300 bring down the computer systems of a hyper-advanced alien race. We barely get devices produced by two different brands to work together here in the 2020s, and cross-platform compatibility wasn't even a thing back in 1996. But don't worry, I promise it all makes sense. Buckle up. According to both the novelization and a deleted scene in the film, after the alien fighter crash landed in Roswell in 1946, the government quickly seized the spacecraft and its alien crew. Research teams at Area 51 spent the next half-century researching alien technology and biology. They eventually reverse-engineered the craft's onboard computers. In order to analyze the alien technology, researchers needed to build computing machines that could interface with the fighters' computer systems. This not only kick-started the information theory revolution, sorry, Claude Shannon, it kept our computing technology in line with the practices adhered to by the alien computer scientists. As researchers made breakthroughs, they would leak these insights to the private sector, pushing the computer era forward at a breakneck pace. The computers in common use when the alien invasion force showed up in the mid-90s were all direct descendants of the aliens' own computers. So not only was the architecture similar, other aspects of interoperability were close enough as to be made compatible with some hard work and ingenuity. But even if we examine the film with zero knowledge of that deleted scene or the novelization, we see that the issue of interoperability was solved from the very beginning. The first shot fired in the war for Earth was a cyberattack. As the city destroyers split apart from the mothership and took up positions around the planet, they hijacked orbiting satellites, remotely reprogramming them to relay the signal from satellite to satellite. This allowed the aliens to coordinate their attack without line of sight, and the only way this could have possibly happened is if the aliens were not only able to communicate with the onboard computers of multiple orbiting satellites, but also suborn them, reprogramming them to do things they were never intended to do. Everything was interoperable from the beginning. I want to know what the aliens were thinking when they realized they could communicate with, hack into, and reprogram our satellites. Did they expect to find compatible computing devices orbiting our planet? Did they think it was a lucky break that they could just use the devices against us? Or were they surprised to see their own computing technologies in use by a species they were sent to destroy? Either way, this should have probably been a red flag. A quick side note, a friend of mine brought up the fact the aliens have 2 fingers on each hand, and their suits of biomechanical armor have 4 fingers on each hand. If we humans naturally count in base 10 because of the 5 fingers on our hands, the aliens probably count in quaternary, which is base 4. Furthermore, the armor worn by the aliens features 4 fingers on each hand, implying they're quite comfortable with powers of 2, just in general. So binary computation would have been pretty natural for these little guys. Nearly 20 years ago, a user experience firm called Nielsen Norman Group published an article about bad UX in movies. One reader replied with, well, a rant about the hacking scene in Independence Day, which is then published by Jacob Nielsen. Despite the reader's obviously dislike for the movie, the points he brings up are some of the most well-articulated I've seen, so they're worth exploring today. So let's see if we can address some of these issues. We're just going to summarize this. The reader says the idea of an alien computer system using a radix bitrate clock cycle, endianness, and instruction set that's even in the same ballpark as a human-made computer would make a viewer's mind reel. I don't want to be too hard on the reader for this, as let's be honest, nobody actually reads film novelizations, and the scene that explicitly stated that human computers are a product of reverse engineering alien tech was cut from the film. But we know better. Of course, human and alien computers would be similar because humanity spent 5 decades doing intergalactic industrial espionage. This is why I think it was a crime to have cut that scene where the whole computer thing was explained, because for millions of people, when someone brings up the movie Independence Day, they don't think, oh yeah, the best film adaptation of War of the Worlds. They think, oh yeah, the movie where Jeff Goldblum hacks the aliens with a magic PowerBook. Anyway, the reader then complains that it would have been virtually impossible for David to have connected his PowerBook to the mothership because it's a pain in the ass to get human computers to interface properly with each other. But here's the thing. David didn't have to connect his computer directly to the mothership. His laptop was connected to the captured fighter's onboard computer with a custom interface that the Area 51 researchers had been using for the last several decades. The communication between the alien mothership and the fighter craft happened through a physical connection with a docking clamp. This docking clamp is designed to hold the fighter in place while it uploads diagnostic information directly to the mothership's computer. And I see some faces lighting up, and don't worry, we'll come back to this. And finally, Did the aliens really design their APIs with a catastrophic vulnerability? Does a military vessel really allow easy access to its central computing system? Would a critical military system really use unsigned code? Would a military computer system really be running without antivirus? The reader rolls his eyes so hard you can almost feel it through the text as he admits the answers to these questions are probably yes. But we really do need to pay close attention to the spirit of these criticisms. They're expressing the real-world frustrations of the author and plenty of us InfoSec folks. This sort of thing happens with alarming frequency right here on Earth, and we'll explore that a little bit later too. But now it's time for the cyber kill chain. A kill chain was, I heard laughter, that's very good. A kill chain was originally a military concept that breaks down an attack into several steps. 1 is the identification of the target, 2 is the dispatching of forces to the target, 3, the initiation of the attack on a target, and 4, the destruction of the target. The cyber kill chain was adapted from the military version by computer scientists at Lockheed-Martin. The idea is to break down the phases of a typical cyber attack and identify how an intrusion can be stopped at each phase. We're going to step through the phases together and explore how the Independence Day hacking film fits into each phase. And for all you cyber kill chain haters out there, you're just going to have to deal with that for the next few minutes, because believe it or not, this model fits our attack better than the MITRE's attack framework or the unified kill chain. The latter models are better suited to modeling attacks from advanced persistent threats while evading detection and establishing persistence in the systems. This cyber attack was essentially a smash and grab and really didn't have any use for stealth or persistence. So that means we can get rid of 5 and 6. Phase 5 is installation, where the malware weapon installs an access point like a backdoor that's usable by the intruder. There were no plans to establish a future access point. In fact, the fighter piloted by David and Captain Hiller was armed with a nuclear missile. The plan was to deliver the malware, then fly to a safe distance and launch the missile at the mothership to destroy it, or at least disrupt it. Phase 6 is command and control. Malware enables the intruder to have hands on the keyboard, persistent access to the target network. And persistence wasn't required for this attack either. Humanity had one shot at this. If the cyber attack failed, the aliens win, humans get exterminated. If the cyber attack succeeds, humans win, the alien invasion is repelled. So here's what the Independence Day hack kill chain looks like. Recon, weaponization, delivery, exploitation, and actions on objectives. Write some malware, set it loose, deploy a nuclear denial of service, and come back home in time for fireworks. But to do that, we have to start with phase 1, reconnaissance. The intruder selects the target, researches it, and attempts to identify vulnerabilities in the target network. If David Levinson saw farther than anyone else, it was because he stood on the shoulders of giants, specifically the Area 51 scientists and technicians like Jerry here. In the novelization, Dr. Oken, who's the director of research at Area 51, outright tells David and friends that the techies have been working on this ship day and night for 50 years, 5 decades. David certainly didn't write all these little notes and stick them all over the interior of the fighter. The nerds at Area 51 did that. By painstakingly mapping out every component and tracing that captured fighter, the scientists and engineers are able to reverse engineer the alien systems. So not only do they figure out how to fly the non-working fighter craft, they also figured out how to duplicate the aliens' microprocessor-based computing technology. As human computers evolved over the years, researchers were able to better interface with the fighter's systems and perform more targeted research. Firmware, OS, file system, all presumably analyzed. And hell, I'm willing to bet the researchers even figured out how to write code that would run on the alien computers long before David and friends showed up. Importantly, the novelization explicitly states that the techies at Area 51 figured out that the fighter interfaces with the mothership using that connector in the dorsal fin we discussed earlier. The thing the geeks at Area 51 never had access to was a live alien signal. When Dr. Oken is briefing our heroes in the movie, he says, "We know tons about the aliens' technology." He said they were able to repair the wrecked fighter. They couldn't get it up and running because we can't duplicate their type of power. It turns out that probably wasn't the problem. It's more likely the techies just didn't realize the fighter needed the signal from the mothership to authorize it to do anything. David's early analysis of the signal helped him figure out that the shield instructions are being transmitted unencrypted inside the signal. And importantly, that alien fighters and destroyers will accept and execute tampered instructions encoded in a forged signal. This is illustrated here when David asked Major Mitchell to shoot an empty pop can off the hull of an alien fighter. Even within the Area 51 complex, buried deep under a mountain, the fighter is still receiving a signal from the mothership in orbit, meaning its shields are still active. Bullet gets deflected. David tells the military brass what everyone already knows. The can, the ship, they're all protected by the energy shields. If we can't beat their defenses, we have to go around them. So he enters a few commands on a laptop. This begins a high-powered broadcast of the tampered signal containing inverted shield toggle instructions. On command, the fighter drops his shields. Major Mitchell can hit the can this time. I think it's pretty clear David is able to identify their shield instructions lived inside the signal and flip it from on to off. Then he rebroadcasts the signal with enough strength that it overrode the legitimate signal being broadcast from orbit. The fighter obeyed the signal, disabled the shields. That was half the problem solved. Now he had to address the question of how to get that tampered signal to every alien fighter and destroyer on the planet. There's no way to drown out the legitimate signal being broadcast, so the only option is to convince the mothership to broadcast the tampered signal itself. David needs to infect the mothership with a piece of malware that modifies the signal to instruct the alien craft to disable their shields. And it turns out he has the perfect attack vector. Remember this guy? That's right, the Roswell fighter is about to become a giant USB stick infected with some nasty custom malware. Phase 2, weaponization. The intruder creates remote access malware weapon like a virus or a worm tailored to one or more vulnerabilities. For David's malware to work, the mothership's diagnostic analysis software must be parsing a diagnostics data stream insecurely, treating injected malware as code it should execute instead of text to be displayed or saved. This results in remote code execution, or RCE. And here's where we enter the realm of conjecture. My theory is that the mothership's main computer system is very similar to the one installed in the Area 51 fighter. And because Area 51 techies already know how to interact with the fighter's operating system, David knows how to do that as well. He also knows what the encoded parameters for shield status look like inside the signal that's being broadcast from the mothership. It's very likely David is able to write a program or a script that'll scan the memory of the mothership's main computer for byte patterns that match the shield's up directive, and swap out functions live until the shield's down directive is encoded into the signal and sent down to the alien attack craft below. As far as the city destroyers and the fighters are concerned, they're receiving a legitimate directive from their leaders to drop their shields. I should mention that near the film's climax, David overrides the alien technicians' display screens to show an animated loop of laughing skull and crossbones. I'm imagining David had the idea to push the Jolly Roger animation to all the fighters and destroyers to DOS their instrumentation, in addition to removing their shields, but he just ran out of time to implement this attack. Peek at his laptop there on the left shows that he loads up the Jolly Roger module and injects it into the diagnostics data stream. After a few moments, every screen on the command pyramid is locked out and overridden. And it makes me wonder if David actually succeeded in overriding every display on the entire 600-kilometer-long mothership with that silly attack. Phase 3, delivery. Intruder transmits a weapon to a target by email attachments, websites, or USB drives, or fighters. As we saw earlier, the malware is delivered through physical connection between the captured fighter and the diagnostic clamp. David's plan is dependent on a rather important assumption that when the alien operators inside the mothership see the captured fighter flying back up to beat it, they'll be curious. They'll want to know why this 50-year-old fighter craft is returning home after all this time, and that means they need to connect the fighter to the mothership to retrieve data from it. In order to deliver this piece of malware, David injected it into the fighter's diagnostics data stream where it's parsed by the computer as it attempts to analyze the diagnostics. The UI elements in the film support the idea that the attack was some sort of attacker in the middle, as opposed to a pre-infected diagnostics package that got uploaded all at once. You can see a scrolling data stream in the main display of the captured fighter on the top there, as well as the displays surrounding the alien and the technician on the bottom. When David's laptop initiates the attacker in the middle connection, a similar data stream is seen in one window, and when the connection succeeds, a second window opens displaying a more detailed visualization of the data stream. It's not exactly technical, but the design language between the two is supposed to show you that, yeah, there's actually a connection happening here. Phase 4, exploitation. The malware weapon's program code triggers, which takes action on the target network to exploit a vulnerability. We know that the actual exploitation was blind because we don't see David get an interactive shell. He just waits till the diagnostics transfer begins, injects the malware into the data stream. Malware is read and executed by the parser. Phase 5, actions on objectives. The intruder takes action to achieve their goals, such as data exfiltration, data destruction, or encryption for ransom. In this case, the actions on objectives consisted of two parts. The first was the automated malware scanning memory and flipping the shield instructions from on to off as they're being broadcast to the attack craft on Earth. And the second one is to destroy the alien mothership with a nuclear warhead once the malware did its job. So to recap, attack chain was something like this. Step 1, recon, discover the vulnerabilities in the alien client-server communications and develop a proof-of-concept exploit. Step 2, weaponization, write the malware to force the mothership to instruct all attack craft to turn off their shields. Step 3 is delivery, inject the malware into the diagnostics upload from a captured fighter to the mothership's computer. 4, exploitation. The mothership parses the tampered diagnostics, executes the malware. And 5, the actions on objectives, where the malware scans the mothership's memory for the shields on directive, changes it to shields off. The change gets encoded into the signal. Every destroyer and fighter suddenly finds themselves having a very bad 4th of July. And to prevent the mothership's technicians from immediately reversing the changes made by the malware, David and Captain Hiller destroyed the mothership with a nuclear missile. So now it's time to put on our blue team hats and see if we can fix the mistakes made by the aliens. At the end of this talk, you'll be able to successfully lead an interstellar invasion without having to worry about a cyber attack grinding the entire operation to an embarrassing halt. Unencrypted communications. One of the first things we learn about the aliens is their mothership is broadcasting an unencrypted signal that contains embedded directives. On its own, this might be a low finding, because in the worst case, it's a one-way communication channel that simply advertised the time of attack to eavesdroppers like David. But as we saw, the issue ended up being combined with other vulnerabilities to achieve remote code execution, resulting in the destruction of the entire alien invasion force. So how do we fix this? Encrypt all communications. As a bonus, consider using your ships as repeaters to transmit the signal beyond line of sight instead of hijacking your enemy's satellites. That way, any nosy telecom engineers on the ground won't start paying special attention to the signal and what's inside it. Depending on the exact capabilities of the alien computer system, encryption could have been prohibitively expensive, and maybe encrypting the signal was considered overkill by the alien higher-ups. But at the end of the day, if the aliens had encrypted the signal to begin with, it would have made David's job of saving the world impossible. As of late 2012, the US military's Predator and Reaper drones were broadcasting unencrypted video streams back to their pilots. As one official said, quote, "Essentially, we are simulcasting to battlefield commanders and the opposing force. If that opposing force knows we can see them and from where, they can take better evasive maneuvers." Now, apparently all you needed was an antenna and a $26 software to intercept the video feeds. Single point of failure. This vulnerability is actually discovered and exploited decades before the events of the film. From the novelization, and here's a quick wall of text. On July 4th, 1947, a scouting mission occurred over the American Southwest, which was the center of a nuclear weapons test. A ship had been delivered to Earth by a carrier vessel and was moments away from completing its mission when its parent ship jumped away from the planet as it was on the verge of being detected by human tracking stations. Suddenly isolated, the alien scout ship lost power, suffered a catastrophic engine failure before crashing outside the town of Roswell, New Mexico. It's worth noting that this was described as losing power and suffering an engine failure. It would have been a little more accurate to describe it like something like, with the loss of the signal from its parent ship, the alien fighter no longer had instructions to remain airborne. But as we've seen, it's actually worse than that. If the system broadcasting a signal is compromised, the attacker can modify the signal, force the alien ships to obey arbitrary commands, because they're essentially thin clients that fly. How would we fix this? This one won't be easy, but it'd be worth it, because city destroyers and fighter craft would need to host their own computer systems that would independently manage mission-critical functions. This may give lower-ranked personnel a lot more freedom to screw up, but it would prevent a major loss if the mothership were to suffer a compromise or broadcast interruption. I'm sure you can come up with a bunch of examples from your own experience, but a couple generic ones here would be a data center where all the servers are connected to a single switch. If the switch goes down, the IT staff is going to have a bad time. If a single employee is a sole expert for a mission-critical subject, things get really interesting if that person leaves the company. Redundancy and distribution of responsibility aren't cheap, but they are effective. I couldn't figure out a better name for this one, so we're going with leaving your things lying around. If the researchers at Area 51 couldn't reverse engineer the fighter that crashed at Roswell, humanity's computational capabilities would not have been advanced enough to launch a decisive cyber attack. For that matter, the researchers wouldn't have been able to repair the fighter to get it to fly back to the mothership in the first place. So how do we fix this? Anything carrying advanced or secret technology should employ a self-destruct mechanism that would destroy anything that could prove useful to an adversary. It doesn't even need to be big, flashy explosion either, like even a sustained energy surge that melts the circuitry might have been enough. US military again. In 1960, the Soviet Union shot down an American U-2 spy plane that was conducting recon operations deep inside Soviet airspace. The pilot was captured and the wreckage of the alien... God damn. See, it's the exact same story, I swear to God. The pilot was captured, the wreckage of the aircraft was recovered by the Soviets this time, who reverse engineered the U-2, resulting in valuable insights into American aircraft metallurgy, materials, and construction mechanisms, or methods. These findings were then used in subsequent Soviet aircraft designs. So yeah, the same story. Unencrypted storage. The malware attack on the alien mothership never could have worked without David learning how the alien OS worked. The only way he could have done that was by studying the captured fighter. So we'd fix this by encrypting everything on the fighter, files, firmware, you name it. But this does raise the key storage and management questions and things like trusted platform modules, which are a little out of scope for this presentation and way out of scope for 1996. So an automatic self-destruct would have fixed this quite nicely, I think. So you'll often see this in IoT devices. Storage and computing power are valuable resources when you're designing a small computing device, and encryption comes at the cost of performance. But preventing an attacker from reading or modifying device data, or at least slowing them down so it's not an interesting problem to them anymore, should be heavily weighted when deciding on a balance between security and usability. Lack of social engineering training. There's no way David and Captain Hiller should have been able to fly that captured fighter all the way to the command pyramid at the center of the mothership. Sentries or pickets should have spotted the fighter and challenged it. This was an active war zone. The aliens should have blasted the fighter to pieces the moment it attempted to infiltrate the mothership. Or at the very least, the fighter should have been remotely flown to a quarantine area and connected to a sandbox diagnostics reader. The fix here isn't so much technical as policy-oriented. All personnel should have been aware of social engineering attacks and been trained to spot and react appropriately to them. And I'm sure you don't need me to give you an example of social engineering. In fact, Dana gave a great talk about phishing and scams yesterday. Data stream, attacker in the middle. Because the fighter is uploading its diagnostics to the mothership over an unencrypted channel, David is able to position himself as an attacker in the middle, allowing him to intercept in the data stream, inject malware, and relay the infected diagnostics to the parser. How do we fix this one? If the diagnostics data stream is encrypted, especially using technology like TLS, David wouldn't have been able to eavesdrop on and tamper with the data being sent from the fighter to the mothership. There's a pattern here, guys. So AIT Core is an open source Python-based software suite created by NASA for data and telemetry collection and command and control for International Space Station and CubeSat missions. The software can be found on GitHub as part of NASA's Advanced Multi-Mission Operating System, or AMOS, which is a set of mission operations and data processing capabilities for robotic missions in general. Earlier this year, a couple of security researchers at Vision Space discovered a number of code execution vulnerabilities in AIT Core, including remote code execution through AITM. You can use that QR code to hop over to the LinkedIn article where they share their findings. The RCE issue happens because telemetry packets sent between a source and a receiving instrument are unencrypted. An attacker can position themselves to eavesdrop on the telemetry, and here's the fun part, inject serialized data in the form of Python pickle because they use pickle for serial. So pickle serializes and deserializes, or pickles and unpickles data, which is inherently insecure, and it says it right on the Python website, don't use this. It'll happily deserialize and execute OS commands. This is called a pickle bomb, which is the best word ever. So in short, I've just described a 5-month-old CVE that could allow an attacker to inject malicious code into the clear text telemetry data stream of a spacecraft, resulting in remote code execution, exactly the thing we have in the movie. Which brings us to remote code execution. Now, we have no way to know if this was due to insecure deserialization pickle bomb situation or if David just simply inserted a Terminator character followed by raw OS command and that was good enough. But that's not really important. What matters is the alien's mothership's diagnostics parser was interpreting malicious payloads as code it should run instead of text to display or save. How do we fix this? The same way we'd fix injection vulnerabilities in general, input sanitization, output encoding. So you set up an allow list that defines expected input. If the input arrives and doesn't match what's defined by the allow list, it gets dropped. Next, make sure the input that does make it through the allow list is escaped or safely encoded so the parser interprets it as data to display or store, not code to execute. So remember yesterday when MuSec talked about Log4j? This is an open source logging framework for Java. It's found in an unimaginable number of applications and services all over the world, including Amazon Web Services, Cloudflare, iCloud, Minecraft, and Steam. If an attacker knows that a Java application or service is running a vulnerable version of Log4j, they can inject a JNDI lookup into any user input that gets logged. Instead of logging this lookup request, Log4j would execute the lookup. And if that lookup expression is an LDAP request to a URL that hosts malicious code, Log4j happily reaches out to that URL and executes the code. This is a vulnerability that was very easy to exploit, and vulnerable targets were literally everywhere. But let's back up for a second. Maybe we're being unfair to the aliens. Like, What if the alien mothership actually had really good security? Like, let's say the diagnostics parser was handling inputs securely and running with the lowest set of privileges possible. While we're at it, let's say the mothership's main computer did in fact have Norton Antivirus Alien Mothership Edition. And just for fun, let's say they're even doing memory protections properly. Even with all that, the cyber attack would have still succeeded, as we saw in the movie, if the aliens also had insecure legacy support. Let's think about it. The captured Area 51 fighter was at least 50 years old. Hell, it probably didn't even belong in the invasion fleet that we saw on the screen. For all we know, even by the 1940s, it was an obsolete fighter that was decommissioned and converted to a scout craft and sold off to the alien equivalent of the CIA's Air America to conduct covert recon operations. When connected to the diagnostic clamp, the mothership would realize, oh, this craft is far too old and outdated to be compatible with the hardened, secure diagnostics parser it normally uses for this sort of thing, so I had to bring up a legacy parser that could interface and talk to the fighter. This parser could have been written well before the 40s. Like, imagine a piece of software written a century ago. This thing runs as root. It has no concept of input validation or sanitization, and if the mothership's EDR doesn't explicitly allow list this app in any processes it creates, it simply won't work. Again, there was a great talk about this yesterday too. Jim and Thomas explained how Microsoft takes forever to deprecate insecure authentication mechanisms like NTLM, and once they finally do, it's going to be another 2 decades before it actually goes away. But it's not just Microsoft. This sort of thing happens all the time here on Earth, and that makes me a little bit happy to think of an invading alien fleet getting wrecked because they supported legacy devices insecurely. They say that every production system gets free penetration tests, but the stakeholders never get to see those reports. The aliens never got to see the report for this particular pen test, but now you have. And hopefully you've had some fun here tonight, because at the end of the day, you just sat through what's effectively a half-hour readout call for a fictional cyber attack that happened in a movie that's nearly 30 years old. You have no idea how much I appreciate being able to do this. I am Ben. You can find me on the socials. Thank you all so very much.
Busted.